Hi, my name is Whitney Heiss, and my topic for today is medical reformation, more importantly, the government's influence in it. So, to give you a better background knowledge, let's start in the late 1800s to early 1900s. At this time, there was no laws, no regulations. Fillers were allowed to be put in foods and medicines. As in terms with the meatpacking industries, sawdust was often used as a filler, and if there was rodents, poisons, or even body parts put in with your little package of ground beef, nothing was said about it, and it was allowed to be shipped out for human consumptions. There was also no filter on marketing, so medicines could market themselves as a one-all cure-all, curing indigestion, memory loss, or nausea. Were allowed to be marketed but be nothing more than sugar water. They didn't actually have to do what they said they did. So this allowed companies free range. There was no checks on them, and often a lot of people ended up sick and dead because of this. So one of the key changers to all of this was Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. This followed a immigrant from Lithuania in his journey in the meatpacking industry, where his job title was literally the shoveler of guts. So to sum up this entire era in a couple sentences, I just want to read a quick quote from the book. If it's not for the faint of heart, so if you don't want to hear this, you can go ahead and mute me now. Worst of any, however, were the fertilizer men and those who served in the cooking rooms. These people could not be shown to the visitor, for the odor of the fertilizer man would scare any ordinary visitor at 100 yards. And as for the other men who worked in the tank rooms full of steam, and in some of which were open vats near the level of the floor, the particular trouble was that they fell into the vats, and when they were fished out, there was never enough of them to be left worth exhibiting. Sometimes they would be overlooked for days till all but the bones of them had gone out to the world as Durham's pure leaf lard. So, you can unmute me now. Um, People would end up dying in these vats, and their bodies would be decomposed and still shipped out with the product. This is disgusting, and thankfully, this did not remain as we now know today, as in the progressive era rolled in. But first, I want you to just look at some photos of that era. You can see the men with the very large knives. They're very heavy and need to be so and very sharp so that they can cut through the whole hog. They didn't really have a way of holding these down, so often men would use their own hands to hold this down while other men chopped. What I need you to realize is that some of the people didn't exactly have their hands in the right position, or they couldn't control the knife and would end up cutting off those people's fingers. So it wasn't uncommon to go into these shops with people who are missing a couple fingers on their hands. In the next image, I want you to just look at that table. All the unsightly bits, the bones, the meats are all somehow going to make its way into a product that was going to be made for human consumption. Um, so it could be, they could take the bones, ground them up, mix them with something, and then label it as potted meat and still be able to sell it to the product so that the companies could make more money and not suffer as much loss. So, knowing all this information, don't those sausages look delicious? So, the progressive era rolled in, and the first one to do something about this was Theodore Roosevelt when he came in and created the 1906 Food and Drugs Act. This created the FDA, who put a stop to the companies and said, hey, wait, you know those rats, poison, and body parts and sawdust you're putting in that food? Yeah, that's not allowed. You gotta stop that. But companies could still mismarket until Franklin D. Roosevelt came to office, and he brought with him the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which said, listen, if you're going to market a medicine as curing indigestion, it actually has to do this. Before this, there was actually an incident where a Tennessee company was marketing medicines to pediatric patients that ended up being when there was no testing on it, and it ended up being a highly toxic chemical analog of antifreeze. This led to over 100 of deaths, most of them children. Thankfully, this act was put into place, and that cut back a lot on it. So something that this company did would never be done again. So we've done a lot since then, and we've brought about the Affordable Care Act with the Obamacare administration, and Medicaid and Medicare, which look great on paper. We're providing health insurance to our lower class and to our elderly once they hit age of retirement. But one of the things I want you to look at is how much we're actually spending on these programs. So let's take Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid spending grew 4.2%, to $705.9 billion in 2017. Medicaid came in behind this, growing at 2.9% to $581.9 billion in 2017. And our national health spending is only projected to grow at an average rate of 5.5 to end up being $6 trillion by 2027. This is quite a bit of money, and as we are a nation of debt and are constantly going in this pattern, we need to be able to justify what we're spending on who we're spending it on. And to me, this is not the case. We are spending quite a bit of money on part of our population that is actually lower than we actually think it is. So if we look at our population ratio, 60 million out of 316.2 million were on Medicaid and Medicare in 2013. This ended up being 18.98% on the services and 81.02 were not on the services, and it only increased about 2% 6 years later. So if we say we're only spending $1 million per person that are on Medicaid and Medicare, we should only be maybe to 100 million at most. At most. But somehow we're going to be at $6 trillion. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me, as this isn't a good quality of healthcare. Yes, it does its job and it's providing health insurance to low-income families and the elderly, but it's not one that is actually very good. My cousin is a type 1 diabetic, and if she were to go on Medicaid and Medicare, she would end up having to lose her house, car, and almost all of her possessions just to still afford the insulin that is needed for her survival. She would not be able to live on Medicaid or Medicare. And my grandfather, who is a type 2 diabetic, would still not be able to afford his insulin, as he has a private health insurance as well as government health insurance. And it's still very expensive thing. And the one thing I don't understand is, if we're spending all this money on these programs, why can't our citizens still buy, in some cases, the medicine that is necessary for survival, or else they're going to end up dying? Where is this money going? So what I suggest is that we take all the people on Medicaid and Medicare and switch them back over to a private health insurance company. What I would like to point out with this is that we can help these people through the transition and take away all this money that we're spending on these programs. So if we do this, health insurance companies are going to have to drop their rates that way they can make something that's the lower caste can pay for, and that's good quality, or else they're just not going to pay for it. Health insurance are going to have to compete with one another to say, hey, we have the better deal. So if we do this, it actually works in a domino effect. Health insurance companies are going to have to drop how much their coverage plans is, which means that hospitals, doctors' offices, and manufacturers who make pharmaceuticals are able to also drop their prices, so that when, like, my mom had to go to the hospital for what we thought was an appendicitis, that bag of saline solution that was $300 could only end up being, they could drop it as far as $50 and make it more affordable. So to wrap this up, what I am saying is we need to limit, not remove, government influence from the medical field. As we know, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Acts are very, very good and are necessary. We do not want to end up where we were 114 years ago before the 1906 Act. We don't want to end up where we were, so we need to limit government influence in these fields, not remove it, or else the possibilities that could happen are dangerous and could also end up to be deadly. This is where I'll wrap it up, and I want to say just thank you for listening.